My name is Amy Whitford, and whenever I look back on my life, I always return to the pale yellow house on the corner of Maple Bridge Lane in Colorado, America. That house still feels like a living memory, even now. I can picture its green porch, the way the wood smelled warm in the summer sun, and the tall oak trees that guarded the front yard like old keepers who had watched over every season of my childhood. My parents, Harold and Marianne, filled that home with a kind of peace most people only read about. My mother used to bake on Sunday afternoons, filling the house with the smell of vanilla, and my father always kept the radio playing soft music from the living room, saying it made the walls feel less lonely. Everything about that house was gentle and familiar, like a long hug you never wanted to let go of. But the comfort of home can disappear in a single moment. I learned that on a cold evening in late autumn, when the wind shook the windows and the sky had the heavy look of early snow. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea from a chipped mug when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something about the silence on the line made my stomach twist. The voice that came after belonged to a police officer from a town south of the city. He told me my parents had been in a car accident. The car had slipped off the road. The words blurred together after that, like someone was reading from a script written in fog. I remember the officer saying, "I'm sorry," and they didn't survive, but what I remember most was the feeling of the world falling out from under me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The tea grew cold on the table, and the house around me felt suddenly too big, too quiet, and too empty. In the days that followed, grief swallowed everything. I walked around the house like a ghost, drifting from room to room, touching the furniture my parents loved, opening drawers they had once filled, running my fingers across the frames of old family pictures. Every corner reminded me of them. My father polishing his shoes in the hallway every morning. My mother humming while she arranged flowers on the dining table. Memories clung to the space like dust on sunlight, and I found myself getting lost in them because they were the only thing I had left. But while I was falling apart, my older brother Daniel seemed to be turning into someone I didn't know. Daniel had always been slightly colder than me, more distant, the kind of man who watched the world as if it owed him something. But after our parents' death, that coldness hardened into something sharp. He walked around the house with a strange sense of ownership, touching things like he was taking inventory. He had already contacted a lawyer about the estate before we had even finished sorting through our parents' belongings. I tried to talk to him, to share memories, to grieve together, but he looked at me like my grief annoyed him. 2 days after the call, something inside him snapped fully into view. He called me into the living room, a room where we used to sit cross-legged in front of the television on Christmas morning, when we were children, and stood near the fireplace like he was rehearsing a speech. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the ticking of the clock above the mantel. When he finally spoke, his voice was sharp, firm, almost irritated. "Amy," he said, "you should find a place for yourself. You have no business here. The property is mine now." For a moment, I didn't understand the words. They didn't make sense. My ears rang and my chest tightened as if I had been hit. I stared at him, waiting for some sign that he was joking or angry or emotional, but he didn't blink. His face was stiff, and his eyes were cold. He had cut me out of the house our parents had built together, like I was some unwanted visitor he needed to remove. He didn't ask where I would go or what I would do. He didn't care. It felt like losing my parents all over again. I didn't argue. Part of me was too broken to fight, and part of me didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I went upstairs to my old bedroom, the one I had painted light blue when I was 16, and opened the closet for the last time. I pulled out my old blue suitcase, the one with the slightly crooked zipper, and began packing the little I owned. Clothes, a few books, a framed photo of my mother holding me in the garden, and the knitted scarf my father had given me one winter. I took only what I could carry. I knew Daniel wouldn't let me take anything more. When I walked out of the house, the evening air was biting cold. The sky had gone gray and heavy, and the first flakes of snow were drifting down. I stood on the porch for a long moment, looking at the front door, the windows, the roofline, trying to memorize every line of the house before it disappeared from my life forever. I touched the porch railing one last time, remembering how my father used to sit there drinking coffee in the mornings. I whispered goodbye, even though no one could hear me, not even the house. Then I walked down the front path, my suitcase wheels rattling over the stone walkway. I didn't look back again. The street felt emptier than it ever had, and the world felt like it had shrunk around me. I had no plan, no money except for the $86 tucked in my wallet, and nowhere to go. The weight of everything pressed down hard, but I kept walking because there was nothing else I could do. With every step, I felt pieces of the life I once knew falling behind me. I was alone with nothing but a suitcase, a broken heart, and a future that felt as dark and cold as the night settling around me. I spent my first night away from home in a tiny, worn-out motel in the small town of River Hollow, about 30 minutes from Maple Bridge. The motel room smelled faintly of old carpet and cheap lemon cleaner, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the man in the next room coughing every few minutes. I dropped my blue suitcase on the floor beside the bed and sat down on the edge of the thin mattress. I had $86 left in my wallet, and every time I looked at that number, I felt a wave of fear climb up my chest. I had never felt so lost before. My life had changed so quickly that I couldn't catch my breath. A few days ago, I had a home, parents I believed were gone, and a brother I thought I knew. Now I had nothing but a motel key and a handful of dollars that wouldn't last more than 2 days. The ceiling was cracked in 3 places, and the paint was peeling like dry paper. I lay there for hours, staring at those cracks as if they were maps that could lead me out of the mess my life had become. My mind kept replaying Daniel's voice, cold and sharp, telling me to find a place for myself. Every time the words repeated, I felt a sting in my chest. How could my own brother throw me away so easily? How could someone I had trusted all my life treat me like I was nothing? I kept asking myself what I had done wrong, but the truth was simple. I hadn't done anything. Daniel had chosen greed over family, and I was paying the price for it. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind pushed against the windows, and the neon motel sign flickered outside, making the room glow with a faint red light every few seconds. At one point, tears began to fall without warning. I wasn't crying loudly, just silently, like the tears were slipping out because my body didn't know what else to do with the pain. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, telling myself that I needed to stay strong. I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't give up. My parents would have wanted me to keep going. At least that's what I told myself to survive the night. Morning came slowly, with a soft gray light seeping through the curtains. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my muscles felt heavy, as if I had been carrying the weight of the whole world on my shoulders. I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my forehead, trying to prepare myself for another day of not knowing what to do. I had no job, no home, and barely enough money for breakfast. Part of me wanted to call anyone, but I didn't have many friends. And the few I did have lived far away in different cities. I felt alone in a way I had never felt before. At around 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't recognize the number, but I felt a strange pull to answer it. Maybe it was a job offer, or maybe someone had found something I dropped. I grabbed the phone with a shaky hand and pressed the screen. The caller ID flashed, St. Vincent Medical Center, Denver. My heart skipped. I didn't know anyone in Denver, not anymore. For a moment I hesitated, wondering if it was a mistake, but something inside me whispered, "Answer it." So I did. When I heard the voice on the other end, my whole world stopped. It was my mother. "Amy, sweetheart, we're alive." For several seconds I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind couldn't make sense of the impossible words I was hearing. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. My mother's voice was softer than I remembered, but it was her. It was really her. Then I heard a soft cough behind her, my father's cough, the familiar one he always had after laughing too hard. That sound hit me like a wave. It was him. It was truly him. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice breaking in the middle. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart," my mother said. "We're here. We're okay." But the relief didn't come all at once. Instead, confusion crashed into me so hard that I had to sit down. What do you mean you're alive?" I managed to choke out. My mother took a deep breath. I could hear it through the phone. "Amy, listen to me carefully. she said. We faked our deaths. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the bed so I wouldn't fall. I felt like the ground had dropped again, just like it did the night the police called. My mother's voice was shaking as if she knew how unreal this sounded. We didn't want to do something so extreme, she continued. But we needed to know the truth about your brother. We saw signs for months. Whispers of money, plans he made without telling us, comments he made about the family's property. We needed to know how he would treat you if we weren't there. My father's voice chimed in, gentle but serious. We're so sorry, Amy. We're sorry you were hurt. We never meant for you to suffer. My hands shook uncontrollably. Tears blurred my vision again, this time from shock, anger, sadness, and overwhelming relief all mixed together. Where are you? I whispered. Please. Tell me where you are. We're at St. Vincent Medical Center in Denver, my father said. We want you to come. We need to explain everything in person. I didn't even hesitate. I'm coming right now. I didn't care that I hadn't slept. I didn't care that my face was puffy from crying, or that I hadn't eaten since the afternoon before. I didn't care that I had only $86 left to my name. None of it mattered. My parents were alive. That truth lit something in me that I hadn't felt in days. Hope. I grabbed my suitcase, leaving the motel key on the nightstand without even checking out. I rushed out the door, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The morning air was cold against my face, but I hardly felt it. I ran to the bus stop, dragging my suitcase behind me, and caught the first bus heading toward Denver. As the bus pulled away, I pressed my forehead against the window and closed my eyes. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and white as the bus sped down the highway. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift inside me. My life was changing again, but this time maybe it was changing for the better. The bus ride to Denver felt like the longest ride of my life. My heart kept pounding as if it were trying to outrun the bus itself. I stared out the window, watching the quiet roads and distant hills pass by, but none of it felt real. My parents were alive. The idea kept circling through my mind like a bird that didn't know where to land. For days I had accepted their deaths as a fact, and now I was headed toward them. The shock sat heavy in me, mixing with relief so deep it made my chest ache. I didn't know whether to smile or cry, and in truth, I felt both happening at once. When the bus finally pulled into the Denver station, I grabbed my suitcase and rushed out. The morning air was sharp and cold, and the sky above the city was a pale silver color. I barely noticed any of it. I called a cab with the little money I had left, hoping it would be enough to get me to St. Vincent Medical Center. The driver, a man named Louis, noticed how I kept twisting my hands in my lap and asked gently if I was all right. I could only nod. Words felt impossible. My entire world had fallen apart and was now trying to stitch itself back together in the span of a few hours. All I could think about was seeing my parents again. The hospital was a tall, white building that stood out against the cloudy sky. As soon as the cab stopped, I paid the fare, almost $34, which took a painful bite out of my remaining money, and rushed inside. The lobby was quiet at that hour, with only a few nurses moving around the front desk. The lights above hummed softly, and the smell of disinfectant wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I went straight to the reception desk, barely able to breathe as I said my parents' names. The nurse, a woman named Carolyn, gave me a small, sympathetic smile before pointing me toward a hallway that led to the private patient rooms. My hands trembled as I walked down that hallway. My steps felt unsteady, like the ground was shifting beneath me. When I reached the door with my mother's name on it, I froze. I stood there for a moment, gripping the door handle, afraid that this was some strange dream, and that the truth would vanish the moment I opened the door. But I forced myself to push it open, and there they were. My mother sat in a white hospital gown, her hair pulled back into a loose bun, her eyes soft and warm, just like always. My father was sitting beside her, dressed in simple clothes, his hand resting on hers. When they saw me, both of their faces lit up with the same familiar, gentle love I had missed more than anything. My knees almost gave out. I rushed forward and wrapped my arms around my mother. I held her so tightly that she let out a small laugh and said, "Amy, sweetheart, breathe," but I couldn't loosen my hold. I felt like if I let go, she might disappear again. My father stood and pulled both of us into one big hug, his arms strong and steady around us. I buried my face into their shoulders, and for the first time in days, I let my tears fall freely. They weren't tears of grief this time. They were tears of relief, of shock, of love that had survived a storm I never saw coming. When I finally sat down, my mother reached for my hand. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were steady. "We need to explain everything," she said softly. "You deserve to know the truth." They began with the night it all started. My father explained that they had overheard Daniel talking in the backyard one evening, long before the accident. He was speaking to a lawyer named Philip Harrow, a man from London, Europe, about selling the house as soon as our parents were gone. My father remembered hearing Daniel ask how much he could get in pounds instead of dollars, as if the thought of converting his inheritance mattered more than the family he was planning to betray. The conversation hadn't been an accident or a misunderstanding. It had been cold, calculated, and frighteningly intentional. My mother told me that they had noticed small changes in Daniel for months. He had begun asking strange questions about their accounts, looking through their files without permission, and insisting that certain belongings should already belong to him. They said they hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but after hearing the conversation with the London lawyer, the truth became impossible to ignore. They needed to know how far Daniel's greed reached, and whether he would turn on me the moment they were gone. My father squeezed my hand gently. "We are so sorry, Amy," he said. "We never wanted to hurt you. We never wanted you to go through what you did." I shook my head, tears filling my eyes again. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" My mother's voice broke as she answered, "We didn't want to put you in danger. If Daniel realized we suspected anything, he might have pushed harder. We needed to create distance. We needed to see what he would do when he thought he had everything to gain." It hurt to hear that. Part of me felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me all over again. But at the same time, I understood why they made that choice. Daniel had thrown me out of the house without hesitation. He had made his intentions painfully clear. And as much as it burned to think about, my parents had been right. They needed to know the truth before deciding what to do with everything they owned. The more they told me, the clearer it all became. The staged accident. The quiet days they spent hidden in a private facility owned by a family friend. The careful steps they took to cut Daniel off from their accounts. And finally, the decision to reveal everything to me once they saw what he had done, how he had thrown me out of the house without a second thought. When they finished telling the story, my mother wiped her eyes and said softly, "We saw his true colors, Amy. But we saw yours too. You didn't become bitter. You didn't fight for money. You didn't ask for anything. You just tried to survive, even when he took everything away from you. That matters." I didn't know what to say. I felt drained, like I had been pulled apart and sewn back together in the same hour. Relief and pain twisted together inside me, leaving me unsure of how to breathe. But as I sat there between my parents, eating a small packet of vending machine pretzels they insisted I share with them, I realized something important. This moment, right here, was the first time in days that I felt safe again. We talked until the evening. We laughed through tears, remembering old stories, healing the wounds their plan had left behind. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. And for the first time in a long time, I dared to hope that the future might actually hold something good for me. The week after I reunited with my parents felt like living inside a storm that had finally begun to quiet. I stayed in a small rental room near the hospital, a place run by an old woman named Helen Morrow, who charged me only $28 a night after hearing my story. Each morning, I walked to the hospital to spend time with my parents. We talked for hours about everything that had happened, about Daniel, about their fears, and about the strange and painful path that had brought us to this point. Every conversation settled something in my heart, and each day I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself. By the end of the week, my parents were ready to be released from the hospital, though they still needed rest. That's when they told me they wanted to meet with me somewhere important. "Amy," my father said that morning, his voice calm but firm, "there's something we need you to do with us today." Something final. He wouldn't tell me what it was, and my mother only squeezed my hand as if to say everything would make sense soon. They asked me to call for a taxi, and we rode together through the quiet streets of Denver, heading toward the center of the city. The sun was bright that afternoon, and the buildings around us reflected the light in a way that made everything feel new, sharp, and alive. I kept looking out the window, wondering what awaited us. The taxi pulled up in front of a tall, modern glass building. A brass plaque beside the door read, "Law Offices of Morrison and Halley." I felt a flutter in my chest. I had never been inside a lawyer's office before, not like this. My parents moved slowly but with purpose as we walked through the glass doors into a wide lobby with polished floors and a long, dark reception desk. The air smelled faintly of cedar and new paper. A man in a gray suit, Mr. Francis Halley, greeted us with a warm smile and guided us down a hallway toward a private conference room. The moment I stepped inside the room, I froze. A long wooden table stretched across the space, and on top of it were several thick folders, stacks of papers, a pen set that looked far too expensive, and a small envelope with my name written across the front. Everything looked official, heavy, final. I turned to my parents with confusion rising in my throat. My father gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "Amy," he said, "this meeting is for you." I felt a pulse of nerves run through me. For me? Why? My mother took a slow breath and reached for my hand. "It's time to settle everything, sweetheart. Everything Daniel tried to take from you, everything he tried to claim as his. It's time we make sure the truth is honored." Mr. Halley opened one of the folders and pushed a stack of documents toward me. "These," he said in a calm voice, "are the full property rights to the Whitford estate in Maplebridge. The house, the land, the vehicles, every asset under that estate now belongs to you." I stared at the papers. My vision blurred for a moment as the weight of the words sank in. My home, the house I grew up in, was being placed in my hands. The house that Daniel threw me out of as if I weren't part of the family. The house my parents built with their love and hard work. My father continued, his voice steady. "The house is valued at $420,000 as of last year. You are the sole owner now." I blinked hard, trying to process everything. Before I could speak, Mr. Halley slid another folder toward me. "This file," he explained, "contains the deed to the farmland in Northfield County, a large property your parents have owned for decades. It includes the land itself, the house on the edge of the field, and the equipment stored in the barns. The farmland is fully paid off. It also now belongs to you." My breath caught. I remembered visiting that farmland as a child, running through the tall grass with my mother, sitting on the porch with my father while he told stories about his grandparents. I had no idea the property was still in the family or that its value was so great. "And finally," my mother said softly, nodding toward the envelope with my name on it, "open that." My fingers trembled as I lifted the envelope and slid the paper out. It was a bank document listing an account with my name printed at the top. At the bottom of the page was the number $150,000. I gasped softly. This is real?" "Very real," my mother said. "We saved that money for emergencies, for your future. We hid it because we feared Daniel would try to take it. Now it is yours. It always should have been." Emotion rose in my throat so quickly that I had to sit down. Tears blurred the edges of the paper as I pressed a hand to my mouth. For the past week, I had been scraping by on a handful of dollars, staying in cheap rooms, eating small meals, and fighting to keep myself standing. And now, somehow, I was being given everything I had lost and more. My father sat beside me and placed his hand gently on mine. "This isn't about money, Amy," he said. "This is about your heart. We saw Daniel's greed long before any of this happened. And we saw your kindness, even when you had nothing left." My mother squeezed my other hand. "Your brother receives nothing not out of anger, but out of truth. He made his choice when he cast you out. We're simply honoring what he showed us." I cried then, not the broken, lost tears I had cried in the motel, but tears of overwhelming relief. I wasn't crying because I wanted the money or the house. I was crying because everything I thought I had lost forever had been returned to me. And because my parents trusted me with the legacy they worked their whole lives to build. The rest of the meeting passed slowly, with signatures, explanations, and final approvals. When it was done, I walked out of the building feeling like the weight of the world had been lifted from me and replaced with something lighter, something full of possibility. Later that evening, my parents insisted I return to Maplebridge alone for the first night, to let the house welcome me back on my own terms. I drove there in a rental car, the sun dipping low behind the hills. When I reached Maplebridge Lane, my heart thumped hard. The pale yellow house stood in the soft light like it had been waiting just for me, its windows glowing faintly as though recognizing me. I walked up the porch steps and unlocked the front door. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar smell of old wood and faint lavender filled my lungs. The air felt warm, almost alive. I touched the wall beside the doorway, running my fingers across the paint, remembering years of laughter, dinners, quiet evenings, and childhood dreams. It felt like the house was breathing again, like it knew I had come home at last. I stood there for a long moment, tears gathering in my eyes, and whispered to myself, "This is my home. And this is my story."